So we come to looking at, well, kind of the Lord's Prayer introduction today. And I do want to talk to you all about prayer because I just think prayer is so essential to any kind of a life of faith. It's the lifeblood of faith, is prayer. In the same way that talking to other people is the lifebread of our or the lifeblood of our relationship with them. You can't be in relationship with another person if you're not, talking, communicating with them. And that's essentially at its root what prayer is. It's just us communicating with, talking to God. Can you imagine, just for a minute, a couple who are married, or they're in partnership with their boyfriend, girlfriend, or whatever, but that never ever talk to one another? Can you imagine that? Well, actually, maybe some of you can. I don't know. I hope not, though. But can you think about that and then ask yourself this: Would such a marriage, would such a partnership be healthy? Would it really be a marriage at all in any real sense? No. Well, so it is. So it is with us and God. If we say that we have faith in God, but we never pray to him, that we never talk to him, what real relationship do we have? It's absolutely essential that we learn in some way how to pray. The problem is, of course, that it's easier said than done. I mean, even with human relationships, I said that about, can you imagine a married couple who never speak to one another? And yet how often does that end up happening in the marriage context? Where conversation that flowed freely at first, which led them, one assumes, into getting married in the first place. Nevertheless, over the course of months and years and decades, it dries up until there doesn't seem to be anything left to say. And so it is often with us and God. It's easy to pray maybe at first, and then we forget how. We should be encouraged, I think, to know that this is not a new problem. This is not something that's just cropped up in your life or my life or in the life of believers over the last few years. This is an ancient problem, which is why, in part, the disciples came to Jesus themselves and they said, Jesus, teach us how to pray. The reason they went to Jesus in this way was because, like rabbis at the time, each and every one of them, they had their set formulas for how their disciples, how their followers should pray. And the reason that they had these set formulas was because all of them knew that prayer is not easy. They knew it was absolutely essential, and yet they knew that it was not easy, and so they would give their disciples instructions. And so it is that Jesus' disciples go to Jesus and they say, well, Lord, how would you want us as your disciples to pray? You're the master, and we see that you have this fantastic prayer life with God. You're often going off into solitude in the mountains. How do you pray, Lord? And so it is that Jesus gives them this prayer that we know, the Lord's Prayer, as his example to them. Not necessarily as an example of a prayer that you should just, read off, rote as it is, as words on the page. Although I want to say that there is great value in doing that, right? The Jewish rabbis that I spoke of, they would give their disciples rote prayers to read, and the idea was that they would read them 3 times a day, morning, noon, and night. Okay? And this is essentially what Jesus is giving his disciples as a pattern to do. Pray 3 times a day, as the other rabbis do, but morning, noon, and night, use these words. There is great value in doing this. It's the kind of a prayer that if you do that, well, you won't necessarily notice it, but it will begin to work on you and in you and change you and move you. Okay? But you don't do it in such a way that you don't think about the words at all, because it's easy to do that, isn't it? We just rabbit through it, and you haven't even thought about the words. You say it slowly, and you say it surely, and you think about the words as you're saying them, and you lift those thoughts to God, and you let it work in you. Does that make sense? But it's not necessarily that you have to use his prayer in that way. You can just use it as we've done before, as I've done before from the platform here, as almost a series of bullet points. It's like Jesus is saying, these are the kinds of things that you should be praying for, as a bare minimum. I mean, there might be other things, but this is the bare minimum of sorts of things that you can pray into. You use it as headers, and then you extrapolate, and you let your prayers sort of pour forth from it. As far as I can see, the more I pray this prayer, and I pray into it, and pray around it, and through it, and it is the prayer of prayers. I say there might be other things that you should pray. Maybe there are. I can't find many. It seems to me to contain almost everything, which is why I want us to spend the next few weeks taking it one line at a time, not to pull it apart, but to dwell deeply in it, and to see what it might teach us about how on earth can we enter into that true relationship with God that Jesus clearly had in mind for his disciples. Yeah? Fantastic. Apart from, we're not going to do that today. Well, we are. What we're going to do is we're looking at these words that Jesus says in his preamble before he tells his disciples the words of the Lord's Prayer, in which he tells them not so much what they should pray, so much as how they should pray, or at least the attitude, the way in which they should enter into this act of praying in order that they might start off in a place that is right before God. So what does Jesus say? He gives basically 3 instructions. So we have a classic 3-point sermon today, isn't that? Hooray for those traditionalists among us. First off, Jesus says to his disciples, go to your room and shut the door. Go to that quiet place. Have that time alone with God. And fantastic advice, I think. Apart from, I think we can misread this. Insofar as I think often we read this and we think that Jesus is perhaps telling us that we should never pray in public at all. Yeah? And I just need to tell you straight up, that's not what Jesus is saying. It's clearly not what he was saying, because Jesus himself is recorded to have prayed in public. Yes? He prays with his disciples. And the disciples, they go on to lead the church and to pray public prayers. And the tradition of the church over the last 2,000 years has been of people gathering together and praying together and imploring God and him answering those prayers and leading them. So he is not saying you must never, ever, ever, ever pray in public or with other people. That's not what he's saying. We have to understand the context in which he's speaking, which is that of, which I've already described really, of the rabbis used to teach their disciples to follow this pattern of prayer where they would pray morning, noon and night. There were set times in which actually everyone in the Jewish culture was expected to pray. Only because it was a very religious society, in a way that our society is not, there was a temptation to try and build yourself up by being really good at doing these set, expected prayers. So rather than being at home, just doing the cooking or whatever it was you would be doing in your day-to-day life at the time when it got to midday and you knew you were supposed to be praying, there was a great temptation for people to make sure that they were in the middle of the market square or somewhere where lots of people could see them so that they could just dramatically drop what they were doing, get down on their knees and pray to God. That was the temptation. And people literally did that. They would make a great big show of making sure that they were in the most public place at the time of prayer. And that's what Jesus is speaking against. He's saying, look, guys, it's not about showing off. Pray 3 times a day by all means. Pray unceasingly by all means. But essentially, it should be an act between you and God, whether you are with other people or whether you are not. But then what do we do with an instruction such as this? I mean, what's it trying to teach us? I think there are some great applications for it, actually. I think that the lesson we can learn is actually, okay, there is prayer to be said in solitude by yourself, and there is prayer to be said in public with other people. What we need to understand is that those 2 types of prayer, they just have different functions. They're just different situations in which you might pray. And I just want to illustrate this for you. Again, going back to that personal relationship between perhaps a husband and a wife. Can you imagine? Can you imagine if maybe if you're a husband or you are a wife? Can you imagine if you started to speak to your spouse in public in the same way that you spoke to them when you were in private? Can you imagine what the reaction might be if you were to do that? Do you think it would be do you think they'd be pleased with you if you did that? And how about the people who were around you at the time? How do you think they would feel about that? They'd be like, oh, gee, it would be awful, wouldn't it? Honestly, I think if you were to start talking to your spouse in the same way in public as you do in private, when you got in private, they would be saying some things to you that you would not ever want to be heard in public, right? I mean, that's just because because you say different things to people in private, yeah? Because you need to, because that's how relationships work. Okay. Well, now I want you to imagine that you only spoke to your spouse in public, and in the way that you would speak to someone in public. Would that be a good marriage? Would that be a good relationship? No. No, you've got to have both that public conversation, because we have to go out and meet other people and talk to them about our life. We have to do that. But on the other hand, we also have to actually get into the nitty-gritty of life and talk about important things together and intimate things together. Actually, if you notice just couples getting together, okay? Often they'll meet in the public space, won't they? Maybe they'll meet as a group of friends. That's where they first meet, at a youth club or something like that when you're young. But it's very soon when people start to get into that more intimate relationship, what do they start to do? They start to take themselves off to be together alone as much as they possibly can, because that's how an intimate relationship works. Well, as it is with us and other people, how much more so is it between us and God? If we're in a real relationship with him, of course you're going to come and you're going to pray to him in public, amongst others in church on a Sunday, but that should not be all that you do. You should be longing to get back home again with him later and discuss with him all the things that you've heard other people saying, yeah? And gossip with him. No, not gossip, but you know what I mean? Like, talk to him on that deeper level, personal level, yeah? And of course, as with proper relationships, all good relationships, you should be listening at least as much as you were talking. Yeah? Okay. Go to your room, shut the door, spend quality personal time with God. What's the next thing that God says, Jesus says to us? Sorry, it's very hard to read that. It does say it along the top line. It says, don't use lots of long and fancy phrases. Don't use lots of long and fancy phrases in order to try and impress God. Maybe this is kind of what Simon was speaking into with his little testimony there. Now, I don't think that this is a real temptation for us, necessarily. Again, it's going back to that culture in which they would find themselves in a public place, not just in a public place, but they would try and use as many fancy words as possible to try and impress the other people around them. I don't think there are many of you here today who are tempted to go down to the Priors Centre or onto the streets of Leamington and pray publicly with long, florent words. Anyone going to do that after the service today to show off? I think it would probably earn you the opposite of respect these days, wouldn't it? So there is a sense in which this is not a danger to us. Apart from, I think there is a sort of an inverted danger in it within our time together in the church. Okay? And the danger works something like this, that in church on a Sunday, when we have times of praying together, usually it's the people who are most confident, like Simon was saying, it's those who are most confident, most fluent, who find words the most easy, who stand up the front and pray. Yeah? And as minister, I'm probably the one that's most guilty of this, okay? I will stand up in front of you and I will pray all kinds of long, complicated prayers using perhaps sometimes theological language. I don't know. And I hope I'm not trying to be hypocritical in that. I hope I'm not trying to just impress you with that. That's not my aim, at least. What I'm trying to do is to express something the best I can in order that you You might use my prayer as your prayer, so to speak, as an aid, as a help. And that's all fine and that's all well, because essentially that is what you pay me for. So, I've got to do my job. But it's okay so far as it goes. The problem happens when you hear those public prayers that are spoken from the platform, and then you think, oh, well, that's the way that I have to pray then. Yeah, and if I can't pray in the way that the minister prays, or in the way that the person leading worship prays, then there's just no point in me praying at all. My prayer isn't going to be acceptable to God in some way. And I just need to tell you that's just not the point. It's just not the truth. It goes back to this thing that there is just a different function in public prayer to private prayer. And what God wants from us when we go to him is prayer. It is not a great understanding of the English language or anything like that. Essentially what he wants from us is our honesty. That's it. Go to him and be honest with him. Even be honest with him about the fact that, Lord, I don't know how to pray. You say, Lord, I don't know how to pray. I don't even know what to pray for. I don't know what is the things that I want and the things that I need. I know that some things I need and some things I want, and I don't know I just need your help. And you just go to him and you pour yourself out to him as honestly as you can. Yeah? And you wait on him, and you hope that in this process of talking to him that, well, in relationship with him, you can begin to work these things out. Yeah? But that's it. So go to him in private and go to him in honesty. And just say, Lord, here I am. Help me. The third thing that Jesus says isn't really an instruction, actually. Again, it's hard to read. It's not really an instruction as such. It's more of an observation that he makes about the nature of God that should help us in our prayers. At least I think that's what he's trying to do. He says, your Father in heaven knows what you need. Now he's telling us essentially that you can go to God as you would go to your parents, as you should go to a good parent. Don't make the mistake of equating God to a bad parent. Rather, our image of what a good parent should be modelled on who God is. But nevertheless, you kind of know what a good father might look like. He's saying, look, you can go to God and you can ask him and you can just lay himself out to him in that way, because he's your father. And so he cares for you, and he's going to give you the things that you ask for if they're good things. Yeah? Yeah? Only we have a problem with this, or at least I've had a problem with this in the past, because he says, your Father in heaven knows what you need. And I think we can do a sort of, we can invert this a little bit. I've often read these words and I've thought, well, if he knows what I need, then why do I need to ask it at all? It's like, what's the point in praying? I mean, shouldn't, Lord, if you know it, then just give it to me. I mean, what's the deal here? What's the point in praying? But the point is this: it's like going to God with that kind of attitude. It would be like a child saying to themselves, "Well, I'm not going to ask my mum and dad what I want for Christmas because they already know." Would that be right? And would a parent be pleased if their child just said, "I'm not going to talk to my parent. I'm never going to ask them for anything because they should just know"? It would be wrong, wouldn't it? Yeah. And actually, what parent doesn't delight to have their child come to them and say, "Mum, Dad, I just want this. Can I have it?" And what parent doesn't delight in giving that gift to their child, like if it's an appropriate gift? Now, of course, parents have to have discretion, don't they? As I think, and I truly believe God has discretion. So there are some things that we're asking for that he knows are not in our best interest, and he will not give them to us. Yeah? So we go to him trusting that he knows what is best, but nevertheless he delights to hear us ask him. Yeah? And he delights to give us those things that he can give us in order that he can build that relationship with us. I say that parents delight in their children going to them and asking for things. Of course, parents don't delight in children going to them and nagging at them, do they? or manipulating them by what? Like throwing a tantrum, that kind of thing, rolling on the ground, throwing their arms all over the place, screaming, hollering, all of that kind of stuff. I never did any of that myself. I was I was more of the child that I'd ask mum first, and if she said no, I'd go to dad. But it's like, but parents don't like that, do they? Because they know that's a manipulation. And so I do think there's a similar thing going on with us and God. He delights to have us go to him and ask him, lay stuff out before him. I don't think he's so into the fact that we sometimes come to him when we try to strong-arm him or manipulate him or force him to do things the way that we would want them done. And you might think, well, in what way do we do that? But I think people do. I think sometimes we think we can go to God, we can sort of bargain with him. It's like, God, if you do give me this thing I want, I'll be a better boy from now on in, or something like that. Yeah? We also do that thing of, we think that like if you pray with a certain tone of voice, or with a certain look in your face, or if you like squeeze your eyes extra hard and, I don't know, find a little bit more faith, like somehow God's more likely to answer us if we do that. It's not the case. It's not what he's wanting from us at all. He just wants us to go to him and say, here it is, Lord. It's what I need. If it's good for me, will you give it to me? And he delights. He delights to give it to us. Though, of course, what does he delight to hear, having answered our prayers? In fact, what does any parent delight to hear on Christmas morning after the child has opened up its presents? Thank you. Thank you. And I think it's essential that we learn that to close our prayers in that way, in a sense, that having gone to him in simplicity and honesty and trust, and having received the things that we have asked for, that we do not forget afterwards to say, thank you, Lord. Thank you, Lord. Yeah? Before we go on to ask for whatever else it is that we think that we should be asking for from him. Well, that's it. That's the attitude in which you should go to God. Okay? It's not complicated. We just need to go to him, and we need to keep it honest. And we need to keep it simple. And we need to trust in God. Trust that he really does have our absolute best interests at heart. And so I encourage you, like after this morning's service maybe is done and you have gone home and you've done whatever you need to do in terms of getting yourself fed for the afternoon, to find time to draw aside, to find a place where you can be with God, just you and him, and talk to him as you might talk to anybody else, being as honest as you can bear, using as simple language as you can find, and trusting that as you do that, he will not just answer like your requests for stuff, okay, but that he will work in you and change you and move you, and ultimately give you the best answer to any prayer that you can possibly hope for. That he begins to make you into that image of himself, which is modelled after his Son, Jesus Christ. That you truly begin to become his sons and daughters. That he really is your heavenly Father above.